Good evening, everybody. Welcome to It's been a minute. Another one of our live episodes here at the Breakdown. Very excited to be back with a live episode. We had a couple of interview episodes that we had in the mix there, and then Alberta politics self-immolated. And I'm not gonna lie. It was a bit of a struggle to try to keep up on all of the things that were happening that were so bad and in so many ways. And even in putting together tonight's show, there were conversations about how exactly do we go about this, um, dealing with this catastrophe. Not to be hyperbolic. And the decision was made, and this will be probably the title of the episode. The old joke goes, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So that's what we're going to try to do for the next little bit here at the Breakdown. We're going to try to catch up and address some of the things. We got some really great stuff planned for over the holiday season, especially for our Patreon supporters. We're going to address that way later on in the show, but let's get right into tonight's program. And what better place to start? What better place to really elevate the discourse than with a conversation about Jordan Peterson? I cannot wait for the bots on this episode. It's going to be delightful. The Tyee published a story this week. Kind of a big deal, this story actually is, for a lot of different reasons. And we're going to try to make sense of those as we work our way through the issues that we're going to try to touch on tonight. But this is actually a really big deal because basically what the Tyee story, written by veteran investigative journalist Charles Russell. So this is the real deal, y'all. Basically, what the Tyee spells out is that through a series of freedom of information requests, they were able to get a bunch of documents that demonstrated that. Sometimes I hear the sentence I'm about to say in my head and it hurts on the way out. This was one of those times. Demonstrates that Danielle Smith went out of her way to try to accredit Jordan Peterson's nascent educational organization, his academy, his online YouTube academy. Danielle Smith wanted to find out if there was some way to accredit a school that's basically very, very niche and very expensive subscriber-based YouTube service. That's not YouTube, for the record. So let's not get all litigious. That offers no degrees. How do we accredit that? And it gets pretty wild. According to the story from the Tyee, on August 1st, 2024, Smith first met with Peterson, and they were trying to discuss about how his organization could work with the province to have their online training program accredited. So at this point, we're not even calling it a school. We're not calling it a college. We're not calling it a university. It's an online training program. So I guess academy is one of those words that sounds impressive but has little to no actual substantive meaning. Do with that what you will. It launched just a couple of weeks later on August 21st, 2024. And this is where it gets bonkers because on September 3rd, 2024, Peterson, reading from the article here, accompanied by his daughter and son-in-law, had an online meeting with then Advanced Education Minister Rajan Sani. Advanced Education met with Peterson Academy representatives to outline pathways by which the Academy could offer post-secondary programming in Alberta and the estimated timeline associated with each. By October 8th, ministry staff had already generated an evaluation of how it could accredit the Peterson Academy. And in case you were wondering whether or not this was ideologically driven, or perhaps this would represent a real benefit to Albertans. Also from the article, the ministry officials noted that the Peterson Academy has no physical presence in Alberta and that degree programs that are offered fully online and do not have an on-the-ground component in Alberta do not require approval. So they have no offices, they have no business. They're based out of the United States, but Danielle Smith really apparently wanted to accredit the Peterson Academy. I guess for bragging rights. I don't know, because it's a private for-profit subscription service. It's kind of like the alt-right masterclass. If you've ever heard of masterclass, it's where you can, there's these people who are, they're very good things. I I may have purchased the Aaron Sorkin class years ago. Um, but you buy the program that you want, you go through the program, and there you go, you learn some things. But that's just online instruction. It's not a post-secondary degree or diploma program. I do not have, as much fun as it would be to be able to like print it out and put it in a frame. I don't have an Aaron Sorkin School of Storytelling diploma, nor should I, because it was just a couple of dozen hours. But one of the other problems with the school, the academy, I'm going to call it an academy, is that it's Jordan Peterson's. Basically, he pontificates on all of the things that he thinks, but then he also has some other instructors. Some of those, and from the article again, some of those instructors are more akin to influencers promoting keto diets and skepticism of vaccines and insulin. So that's super cool. Um, but here's where the problem really kind of comes in, because um, the article wasn't able to, at least Charles Russell in the article didn't articulate whether or not it was Smith who approached Peterson or Peterson who approached Smith. And the reality is, in the political climate in which we live today, both are plausible, which is bonkers. It is bonkers that the premier of that it is plausible. I'm not saying that's what happened, because it doesn't say in the article, but it is bonkers that it's plausible, if not likely. I feel like, my personal feeling is, I would not in any way be surprised if Smith reached out to Peterson and was like, I would love to expand the conservative-minded education in the province of Alberta, and accredit your fine online video platform. I mean, by that logic, it's only days before the Rebel gets accredited, but it's equally plausible. There's no way to know, and it should be very easy to go like, oh no, the premier of Alberta would never contact a crazy man, allegedly, uh, who started an online video platform to accredit it for post-secondary means in the purposes in the province of Alberta. That should be an easy no. That should be an easy, well, that would never happen. But we live in the upside down, and it's entirely plausible. It's also entirely plausible, given that Daniel Smith was hanging out with Peterson at Mar-a-Lago. Again, that sentence hurt on the way out. It's entirely plausible that Peterson was like, hey, you seem like an easy mark, or maybe he thought something else. I don't know. But it's entirely plausible that Peterson felt that the climate in Alberta was such that he could take his online video course money-making venture to the premier of Alberta, and she would go, that's a great idea. I'm not sure which one's worse. I'm legitimately not. If the reputation of the province of Alberta is such that anybody who wants to charge, I don't know, I think it was like $600, $399. I had that written down somewhere. Anybody who wants to charge that much for their online subscription video platform would go, hey, I've got Danny's number. I'll bet she'll set me up. Now, it's worth noting that the article also makes it very clear that there's been no applications put forward. And as per social media posts, and we're going to get into some social media posts in just a minute here, as per social media posts, Mr. Peterson is taking an indefinite leave of absence due to health stuffs. Do with that what you will. But here's where it gets extra bonkers. Because, again, this goes back to the whole question of, what does Danielle Smith believe that she can do? And she answered that question. We're not talking about a mandate. We're not talking about things that she ran on. We're not talking about things that she put in a party platform. What does Danielle Smith believe that she can do? And on an Edmonton-based podcast, which is how CBC referred to it, and I love that so much, she answered that question.
Parliament and legislatures are supreme. We can pass a law anytime we like. We can change a law anytime we like. We can revise a law anytime we like. That's because we're the democratically elected body.
There you go. And she's not technically wrong. And that's something that Albertans need to understand and appreciate. She's not technically wrong. Once somebody's in government for 4 years, maybe 4.5 years, depends on the government, I suppose, up to 5 as per the Constitution. But once somebody's in government, then they're given the keys to the kingdom. They can make laws, they can revoke laws. And we've seen that play out, particularly in this most recent legislative session, where Danielle Smith has made a boatload of laws that she absolutely did not campaign on. And she did not in any way communicate to the electorate during the election. The bans on gender affirming care and the attempted criminalization of physicians who provide gender affirming care, that was not in the 2023 UCP campaign platform. Everybody was blown away when that was announced. This is Danny-ing, and it's quite literally in her power to do so. And so it shouldn't come as a shock, given that we have really 2 viable options as to how did the whole school question come into play, that Danielle Smith would use that power to support Jordan Peterson. We saw in this legislative session, Bill 13 was introduced. And we're going to spend some time talking about Bill 13, but we're also going to spend some time talking about what a fascinating choice, holding Jordan Peterson up as the example of people who have been persecuted, air quotes for the audio listeners, because of their social media commentary. She introduced a law. It's called Bill 13. She called it Peterson's Law. So let's take, and really she did. That's her graphic, not ours. It came directly from this tweet where Alberta will continue being a place where free speech is defended. Is it though? And we're going to talk about that too. Cases across Canada, like the high-profile disciplinary proceedings of Dr. Jordan Peterson, and then again, she tags him. Like, we're so desperate for social media clout in this province. It's painful. And then she gets into the light version of what she wants to do with this bill. Before we get into that, though, I want to spend just a little bit of time on the clip of her talking about the absolute power of the legislature, because that is one interpretation of how power is supposed to be wielded in the type of democracy that Canada/Alberta are. And there is, and you're going to see this theme throughout tonight's show, a demonization of the other areas that are supposed to hold all the other areas in check. Cole's notes is we have the executive, that's the previous office of the cabinet. We have the legislative, that's the whole legislature and whoever controls it, which is currently the UCP, right? And then we have the judiciary, and they're supposed to act as checks on each other. Now, there's a lot of people who would make a very strong argument that in the parliamentary democracy that we have, the trump card is the elected body, whether we're talking about legislature or parliament. And that is, on a technical reading, true. And that's important to understand. But a lot of it depends, and a lot of it is revealed in how you choose to view your interpretation of power. Because if you're somebody who believes that any kind of legislation should be the best possible legislation, it should be the most bulletproof legislation possible. It's not the kind of legislation that should have to cost taxpayers in the legal system an incredible amount of time and resources and money defending it because it was poorly written, cough, Sovereignty Act, cough. But that's if that's the goal, then you will work with the judiciary. You will work with the lawyers. You will work with the judges to try to make sure that the laws that you're putting in place that govern, whether we're talking about Alberta or we're talking about Canada, those places They have to happen. They have to work collaboratively. Or you can take the view, as Daniel Smith clearly articulated there in that clip we played, no, once it's mine, la, la, la. I get to do what I want. And it's ironic. And this is where it's really important to sort of take a step back and try to intellectualize a little bit, because you have to remember a lot of where the grievances come from for a lot of this stuff, at least recently, has to do with COVID and the COVID pandemic. There's a lot of people who feel like their freedoms were trampled during COVID. And technically, their charter rights were suppressed, but they were suppressed using Section 1 of the charter, which says if there's sometimes we have things happen and we have to be able to respond to those things, like in a pandemic. And if that means that we have to suppress some charter freedoms for a little bit, that's what we have to do in order to keep everybody safe, in order to keep our democratic society functioning. That's what we have to do. So we'll do it. But it has to be for the minimum amount of harm and the minimum amount of time. And there's all kinds of rules about that. And there's a lot of people who felt like, oh, I don't know about how that worked out for me. I feel like maybe that didn't work out great. I don't know that it was justified for me. Here's the metric. Here's the test that we can apply. No, I'm not talking about the Oaks test. I'm talking about a simple logic test. If Daniel Smith believes the Parliament, or the governing body, the elected body, has the ultimate authority, and that's that. And the only time anybody should be able to complain about it is during elections, which is what her position, her stated position is, because that's when voters can hold governments to account. If she truly, truly believes that, can we all take a moment to imagine what Smith would have done if Trudeau had shut down the inquiry over the occupation of Ottawa? If he just said, you know what? No, I stand by my decisions. I'm the elected government. Y'all can suck it. It's done. I did it. La, la, la. Daniel Smith and the like-minded conservatives would have lost their minds. And there is value in the courts looking at these things, because you don't have to think very, very hard about how many times Smith and the people who were upset about the restrictions that were put in place during COVID have celebrated the fact that the restrictions that the UCP put into effect in Alberta were technically illegal. Now, they were technically illegal because the UCP stepped all over the chief minister of health, medical officer of health, chief medical officer of health, sorry. The UCP stepped all over the chief medical officer of health and dictated what the restrictions were going to be. So that's what made them illegal. But the courts being able to take a look after the fact and go, yeah, the way that the premier and cabinet, they made all of those decisions, that was not great. That was illegal. Without the courts, we would not have had that decision. You don't get to pick and choose when you like the guardrails and when you like the separations of power, just because you're the person in power. We saw with Kenny and the COVID restrictions, that power corrupted and it caused illegal laws to happen. With Danielle Smith, as we'll go through, as we see tonight, she has taken the position that the courts need to shut the hell up if she makes a decision, because that's that. Which brings us back to the Regulated Professions Neutrality Act, or as Danny likes to call it, the Peterson's Law. Now, there's a bunch that we have to unpack here. So strap in, because we're going to do a deep dive on what is it exactly that happened with Jordan Peterson. What was it that played out that caused him to have the problems that he did? What was it he said? What was the response? All of that. So we're going to try to take some time to go through that tonight. To start with, we got to talk about Jordan Peterson's appearance on Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan Experience, I believe it's called. I don't listen to it. It was 4 hours long. Jordan Peterson went on the Joe Rogan Experience with that bow tie and with his full chest. He did 4 hours of pontificating, talking about things of which his qualifications are certainly at the very least questionable, if not non-existent. And that's the first piece that got him in a good bunch of trouble. So there were a bunch of different things that were said, but basically he did go on the show, identified himself as a clinical psychologist. And that's where you have to be really, really careful, or you should, if you're a responsible professional, be very, very careful. I have never, nor would I ever want anyone, and I'm going to use myself as an example here, probably to my own detriment, but I have never, nor would I ever want anyone to listen or know that I'm a paramedic and go, therefore I should listen to what he has to say about politics, or therefore what I should listen to what he has to say about horticulture, or any of those things. If we're going to have a conversation about emergency medical services in the field and ambulances, then yeah, I think I bring a little bit to the table. But if it's unrelated, I should not be using that professional title to bolster my credibility in ways that is unrelated or undeserved or unwarranted. But that's what the concerns were when Jordan Peterson went on the Joe Rogan podcast. He identified himself as a clinical psychologist, and then pontificated on a number of issues with authority, like I said, with his full chest, including climate change, arguing that outdoor air pollution did not have a significant impact on kids, and a variety of other issues which he has no expertise, including global economics, and the assertion that people only starve now because governments will it. And that is where the real trouble started for him, because when talking about the child starvation and when talking about the air pollution, the quote that he threw up was, well, it's just poor children and the world has too many people in it anyways. And I'm going to deviate from the plan of the show for a quick second, because this is so bonkers. The notion that people are only facing food insecurity or lack of nutrition because governments will it. And I swear to God, I don't know how Dr. Paul Parks knew that I was going to be doing this topic tonight, but somehow he did, because he put up a Twitter thread that included a study from, I believe it was the University of Toronto. And I want to throw some of those graphics on the screen right now, because this is absolutely appalling. What these graphics are showing right here. There's two different ones that we're looking at. One of them is percentage of children under 18 living in food insecure households by province. Alberta, 38%. 38% of children under the age of 18 are living in food insecure households by province in Alberta in 2024. And if we take a look at the percentage of overall people living in food insecure households by province, again, looking at Alberta in 2024, 30.9% of all Albertans. 30.9% of all Albertans are living in food insecurity. And if we were to take Mr. Jordan Peterson's assertion that that only happens because governments will it, I can think of no greater or more damning indictment of the current provincial government, if that's the position that he wishes to still hold a couple years after that interview. I don't know if that's the position that he wishes to still hold. But that's just such a bonkers number. I couldn't let that one just go by, because it's such an insane number. But let's let Danny talk about Mr. Peterson for just a quick second here.
Limiting or prohibiting expression narrows public discourse and cuts off opportunities for open discussion. Both are foundations of democracy and integral to every citizen's ability and right to fully participate in society. No one cherishes their freedoms like Albertans do. This is a sentiment that we hear often and something that our government takes seriously. Last year, our government reviewed more than 100 regulated professions to assess whether regulatory bodies were upholding the rights and freedoms of their members. At the time, we indicated if legislative action was needed, that we would take it. And today, we are living up to that promise with what we're calling our Peterson Law.
So there we go. That's why, because Mr. Peterson said some things and he got in trouble. That's why we're doing this whole deep dive now. So out of the Joe Rogan show, the Joe Rogan Experience, came a complaint. And one of the complaints actually came from a psychologist himself. This is from the document that Jordan Peterson himself posted on his own social media when he was talking about the complaints against him. They detailed a bunch of the crazy things that Mr. Peterson said, and then said, furthermore, I have my own concerns about Dr. Peterson's mental health status during the Joe Rogan interview, as there is ample evidence in the hour I reviewed. Again, the whole thing's 4 hours long, but this psychologist could only get through 1 hour of his being disinhibited, tangential, circumlocutory, and grandiose. The 60-minute partially transcribed below, I have spent many an hour with unwell clients, and if any of them have made these statements, I would have been speaking with their psychiatrist about their stability and need for potential admission. As a psychologist, I'm appalled by Dr. Peterson's behavior and the impunity with which he feels he can pontificate on areas well outside his areas of competence. He's embarrassing and undermining the profession. So that's another registered psychologist saying that Jordan Peterson's behavior on that interview, which many people thought was wonderful. It was inspiring. He just spoke his mind. Well, sometimes to the outsider, it looks like maybe they're speaking their mind. Sometimes to a clinician, maybe it looks like they're disinhibited, tangential, circumlocutory, and grandiose. Do with that what you will. But it wasn't just the Joe Rogan interview that got Mr. Peterson in trouble. He also liked to tweet quite a bit. In a Twitter exchange with Roger Palfrey, based on the record of human behavior, we're already overpopulating the small world. Any arguments I've heard for supporting such a large human population completely overlook the huge loss of species and ecosystem resulting from our self-absorbed attention. Jordan Peterson, the registered mental health worker, says you're free to leave at any point. And many people interpreted that. And Mr. Peterson himself admitted that it was a joke about how that person could kill themselves if they want to. Now, that's probably not the best joke to be making as a registered mental health person out in the ether. And even if you want to say it's a joke, that's fine. I have made many offensive jokes in the 7 years of doing this show, and I have defended them. But the difference is I don't make jokes about the area that I work in, because I wouldn't want people to look at me making a bad joke, an off-color joke, and have them go, is that how paramedics view the world? Because I do take the responsibility of my profession quite seriously, as any regulated health profession or any regulated professional should. That's just the first example, though. We have many more. Mr. Peterson responded to the announcement. And again, this is another one of those like, okay, we're going with the post-millennial moments. Mr. Peterson retweeted the post-millennial who talked about during the Ottawa occupation by the Freedom Convoy folks, the police, the Ottawa police chief said that they were looking at ways to make sure that kids were safe when they started moving people out of the area, which is an entirely reasonable, safe thing to do. When a situation is about to escalate and there is a very real risk of violence, it is responsible for law enforcement and social services to make sure that kids are safe. But Jordan Peterson decided to take it in a whole different direction. Children removed. How exactly? Why exactly? By whom exactly? Since where exactly? And for how long exactly? Think this through, Canadians. This is a bad decision. So trying to reframe the attempts by law enforcement to make sure that kids who had been brought to that protest and the responsibility of those parents is probably up to intelligent people can disagree. But to try to reframe that as if it's a whole conspiracy to take their kids is really quite reckless. Got into a Twitter fight with Gerald Butts. Gerald Butts raised concerns with Jordan Peterson calling him corrupt, because Jordan Peterson did call him corrupt. Jordan Peterson responded to Gerald Butts being like, hey man, how about you delete that by saying, because you can't say somebody's corrupt. You can't say statements like that without being able to back it up. Is it? I meant nothing of the sort. I called you corrupt for your inflammatory and careless comments accusing those Canadians who oppose your views of MAGA sympathies and the prejudices you feel accompany that. But if the shoe fits, Mr. Butts, you're welcome to wear it. And where we really started to find Mr. Peterson got himself into trouble was when he started to talk about the COVID mandates. Now, again, mental health worker, 100%. Epidemiologist, virologist, public health expert, 100% not. Pierre Poilievre said, COVID has become a never-ending excuse for power-hungry authorities to replace our freedom with their control. Enough, reopen the businesses, let our truckers drive, and restore freedom for all. The truckers were allowed to drive. They just weren't allowed to park in Ottawa. Enough, said Jordan Peterson. Enough COVID mandates. Drop the damn masks and the 88 rules and get on with life today. So, again, there is a whole question about the content and the veracity of the things. But where he really got himself into trouble was where he went after Canadian actor Elliot Page. The New York Post put up a tweet with an accompanying article. Elliot Page is proud to introduce trans character on Umbrella Academy. Jordan Peterson took it upon himself to retweet that post by the New York Post and say, remember when pride was a sin and Ellen Page just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician. Now, there's a lot to unpack in those two sentences. The implication by a mental health worker, clinician, that gender dysphoria, which exists as a diagnosis in the DSM, I think we're up to 5 now, it is recognized. This is a recognized clinical condition. To call somebody who is navigating gender dysphoria to reduce that clinical condition down to pride is very problematic. To say that Ellen Page and to dead name Elliot Page in that way is just a dick move. That's all it is. It's a dick move. And you can make arguments about whether or not professionals can be dicks or not, but it's a dick move. And when you pair it with the first sentence, that's especially problematic. But where he says that just had her breasts removed by a criminal physician implies that a physician who is providing gender-affirming care to an adult is somehow criminal. The tweet is defamatory. The tweet is clinically inappropriate. And most importantly, it's mean. And this is something that even Dr. Peterson acknowledged in one of his statements of his position statements in his reply to the college. He said that, yeah, maybe my tone, it was a little off. I've talked to a bunch of people, journalists, CEOs, and they've said, yeah, I should probably adjust my tone. So I adjust my tone. But it's not just the tone piece. He says things that are demonstrably and easily demonstrably false. In response to somebody talking about the convoy problems, that tweet by Marzana or at Anti-Serenity has since been deleted. Hashtag Trudeau was right about white supremacy problem in this country. Jordan Peterson who is followed by millions, puts it out into the ether. Nazis, white supremacists, these simply do not exist in Canada. There's no culture of such things in Canada, political or otherwise. Let's go to the headlines from this week, shall we? Because here in Alberta, in northern Alberta, well, middle Alberta and southern Alberta, we had headlines. Man charged with willful promotion of hatred in Lloydminster. There we have a Nazi flag. RCMP and Brooks investigate anti-immigrant white supremacist graffiti. Make Brooks white again with a white supremacist symbol. Additionally, graffiti showing a swastika and the numbers 14 and 88. 14 refers to 14 words. It is a white supremacist Nazi slogan. 88 refers to HH. You can do the math on that yourself. So, yeah, there's a Nazi problem. And it's not like it's a new thing. And some people will say, well, Nate, those are examples from this week, and that tweet was from 2022. How could Jordan Peterson have possibly known that there was a Nazi problem? You'd have to go back to before that tweet. I don't know, to maybe the neck of the woods, Alberta, that he's from, to find an example of, oh, look. 2 examples. Northern Alberta property owner removes Nazi flag after visit from RCMP. And then a week later, it is extremely disturbing. These are 2 different photos in 2 different places, by the way. Nazi flag seen flying on second rural Alberta property in a week. So let's be super clear. Yeah, there are Nazis in Canada. There are white supremacists in Canada. There are Nazis in Alberta. And there are white supremacists in Alberta. And to suggest otherwise, to use a platform where you're being followed by millions to simply say, it's not real, everybody, is not just wrong, it's irresponsible. All of this happened while he was using his status as a clinical psychologist. And he was using the platform of, you should listen to me because I'm a clinical psychologist, which he continues to use with his Peterson Academy, that either he or Danielle Smith felt should be accredited in the province of Alberta, despite having, again, no physical presence in the province of Alberta. And the concern is credibility. All speech is not equal. Some is given greater weight when it comes from a position of authority. And this goes back to what I was saying about the importance of not using titles to gain cred in areas that those titles aren't applicable to. But some people who have those titles extra weight. Some people give extra weight because it comes from famous people. There's all the Hollywood people who do all the ridiculous things with the health things. They start their own companies. It's not based on anything other than, I'd like to make some money, please. But because they're famous, people go, oh, well, if so-and-so is doing it, must be a great idea. I'm going to give it a try regardless of what the consequences are. You don't have to look very far to see Hollywood stars, Jenna McCarthy cough, who have done irreparable damage to public health because of the lies they've disseminated about vaccination. People listen to people who have platforms. People listen to people who have authority. In Canada, we recognize that words sometimes have real consequences. And in the case of hate speech, we recognize those consequences need to be sometimes criminal because of the harm that hate speech can cause. But just because speech doesn't qualify as hate speech doesn't mean that it can't cause harm. And when a professional designation is used as a force multiplier for speech and the harm it can cause, then any sane person should be able to recognize that a professional body, for the reputation of the profession, needs to be able to rein that speech in. Jordan Peterson's words and the manner in which he used them caused harm, not only the people he targeted, but also to his profession. And this was well articulated in the multiple complaints that were made to his professional body. But there's more, because it's also worth remembering that in 2024, under oath, the Prime Minister of Canada claimed to have proof that Jordan Peterson was being funded by Russia in an attempt to destabilize Canada and democracy.
We have seen that anti-vax messages during the convoy and during the pandemic were amplified by Russian propaganda, especially in the media of the right, and it was continued by messages the people who were sharing anti-vax messages. It doesn't mean that there weren't people who were legitimately anti-vax, but that was hugely amplified by Russian propaganda. And once Ukraine was invaded, we saw a lot of those channels become pro-Putin propaganda channels. And as I said, we've recently seen that RT is currently funding bloggers and other YouTube personalities of the right, such as Jordan Peterson, other names that are well known, and Tucker Carlson as well, in order to amplify messages that are destabilizing democracies.
And given that Jordan Peterson stayed in Russia for emergency treatment for benzodiazepine addiction in 2020, that statement that was made in 2024, hey, you know what, Jordan Peterson spent a bunch of time in Russia for treatment for substance abuse. And I'm not casting shade on that, to be clear. But the fact that he stayed in Russia for an extended period of time, and the fact that the prime minister said, hey, he was getting paid by Russians to destabilize democracy, one might think, given that and the weight of all of the complaints that we've already talked about, one might think that would give, I don't know, the premier of a province pause before she decides that she's going to name a bill after that person. But Danielle Smith's allegiance to her thought leaders is so much greater than her concern for Canada or Alberta that she named a law after this guy for being held accountable for the words he chose to use and the force with which to wield them. Danielle Smith lies all the time, all too easily. In a perfect world, there would be a way to hold politicians to account that didn't require waiting a full 4 years to vote them out when they chronically lie to their electorate, to the voters, to the people that they're supposed to be responsible for providing good governance. But rather than pump the brakes on how easily people can lie and mislead, and according to the Prime Minister of Canada, destabilize the country on behalf of foreign agents, we're going to make it easier for all of those things to happen. But that's not all that that Bill C-13 does. Sorry, Bill 13 does. I got it was the Prime Minister thing. I got the federal thing in my head for a second there. That's entirely on me. And in order to talk about the other things that Bill 13 does, we got to let Danny talk about her thoughts on DEI for a second.
Premier, what role, if any, do you think DEI has to play in society today?
Well, I think that the discussion about merit-based promotion is one that is really important. And if we have candidates who are able to meet all the qualifications of a particular field or profession or job, we want to make sure that there isn't any discrimination against them. I think that's a completely legitimate thing for us to be doing. But I think that let's be frank, DEI is a very highly charged ideological doctrine that teaches a particular perspective about colonialism and white settlement. And you have to ask the question, what are we trying to get to with that? Are we trying to get to a point where we have fairness in hiring and a diversity of people who are hired into positions, or are we trying to socially engineer some kind of narrative? So I think that it's pretty clear that there's a difference between those two things, and we certainly support merit-based hiring and making sure that we're removing any barriers.
Okay. For the cheap seats, nope, that's not what DEI is at all. In a shocking twist, Danny managed to do a fantastic job of getting pretty much all of it wrong. So, for the record, and it's unfortunate that we're at a place where words don't mean what words mean anymore, because politicians and the Premier of Alberta want to make words mean what they want to mean. But let's talk for a second about what DEI actually is, and then we'll talk about, and then we'll talk about why she was asked that question. So, quick perusal over to the Wikipedia there, and Wikipedia tells us diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, or organizational frameworks that seek to promote the fair treatment and full participation of all people, particularly people who have been historically underrepresented, marginalized, or subject to discrimination based on identity or disability. These notions, diversity, equity, and inclusion, together represent three closely linked values which organizations seek to institutionalize through DEI frameworks. Diversity refers to the presence of variety within the organizational workforce and characteristics such as race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, age, culture, class, veteran status, or religion. Equity refers to the concept of fairness and justice, such as fair compensation and substantive equality. More specifically, equity usually also includes a focus on social disparities, allocating resources, decision-making authority to groups that have been historically disadvantaged, and taking into consideration a person's unique circumstances, adjusting treatment accordingly so that the end result is equal. Inclusion refers to creating an organizational culture that creates an experience where all employees will feel their voices are heard. So, DEI is listening to everybody, which Danny says she loves to do. Danny says it's one of her number one things. She really, really believes that you should listen to everybody. And that's what it is. It's listening to everybody. It's making sure that everybody gets the opportunity to make their voices heard so that whatever policy decisions or organizational decisions are made are informed and in the best interests of as many people as possible. That's all that it is. Nowhere in there do you have colonialism and white settlement. That's not what it is at all. Now, if we are in a position where perhaps we need to recognize that there are groups that have been disproportionately impacted by colonialism, it costs nothing to have that conversation. It doesn't diminish anybody to say, yeah, that was the thing that happened, and the effects are still being navigated. So we should probably do our very, very best to let's make sure that we keep moving forward on that, as opposed to being wildly regressive. That doesn't hurt anybody. That doesn't diminish anybody unless you're just profoundly, profoundly insecure. But for the really cheap seats, there's a graph that comes out of the Wikipedia thing. And it boils down to, again, diversity, presence of different people and perspectives, equity, fair access, opportunity, and support, inclusion, a sense of belonging, voice, and decision-making authority. That's it. It's not the big, scary boogeyman that bad faith actors want to make it out to be. But it is apparently something that is so terrifying, that idea of fair access, opportunity, and support, and a sense of belonging. Oh, that is a bridge too far. We should not allow that. And so we made a law in Alberta. And here's what the law is. It is the neutrality of regulatory bodies. And basically what it says is that a person's race, color, ancestry, national or ethnic origin, religious belief, political belief, conscientious beliefs, sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity, any of those things cannot influence any decisions by that regulatory body. A regulatory appeal body or regulatory body must not, with respect to any of those things that I just listed off there, promote or affirm the principle, act or make a decision to omit an act or decision in accordance with the principle, or make, amend, repeal, or maintain regulations, bylaws, policies, or other instruments in accordance with the principles. Very boring legal language. But here's what the following principles apply. So a person's value is or should be determined in whole or in part on an enumerated personal characteristic. Now, there's not many people who are going to say a person's personal value should be based on only one of those things. A person is morally superior to another person because of an enumerated personal characteristic. Now, again, I want to draw your attention to religious belief and political belief, and I just want to make it really freaking clear, given that I just had slides of Nazis in Alberta up a few minutes ago. No. I believe that there are many people who are absolutely morally superior to Nazis. That should not be a controversial statement. I don't think, if your political views are the extermination of, I don't care who, I don't care what demographic, but if your political views include genocide, yeah, there's a whole lot of people who don't believe in genocide who are morally superior to you. And this is just an easy example of how profoundly flawed this legislation is. Almost as if they didn't seek a variety of viewpoints when they were crafting it. A person is necessarily biased or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously, because of an enumerated personal characteristic. A person's status is privileged or disadvantaged is necessarily determined by an enumerated personal characteristic. A person bears responsibility for actions committed by another person with the same enumerated personal characteristic as that person because of the shared enumerated personal characteristic, even though the person had no involvement in the actions. I don't want to feel bad about residential schools. Don't make me. That's what that whole paragraph is. A person bears responsibility for actions. Nobody's allowed to say that a person bears responsibility for actions committed by another person with the same enumerated personal characteristic as that person because of the shared enumerated personal characteristic, even though that person had no involvement in the actions. How do we address, given this, any sort of institutional prejudices? And they do exist. There's data that backs it up. There is data that makes it clear. Women, wildly undertreated when it comes to pain in the healthcare system. First Nations people's experience in the healthcare system, wildly horrifying compared to not First Nations people in the healthcare system. But this section here says regulatory bodies, professional bodies, aren't allowed to address those demonstrable, provable things. But that's not all. It's not just that we don't want policies to make sure that those things get addressed. They take it a whole step farther because they also don't want any kind of education to address any of these things. A regulatory appeal body or regulatory body may require a regulated professional person seeking to become a regulated professional to complete education or training only if that training or education relates to professional competence or ethical standards for the practice of the regulated profession. And it talks about so if you want to be a lawyer, you have to be able to law stuffs. What is prohibited education or training, despite anything to the contrary in Section 7, notwithstanding, you might say, a regulatory appeal body or regulatory body must not require a regulated profession or person seeking to become a regulated professional to complete education or training that addresses one or the more of the following matters: cultural competency, unconscious bias, diversity, equity, or inclusion, any other matter regulated or specified in the professions. We don't want people who are dealing with healthcare, who are dealing with the legal system or anything like that, to have any awareness of their unconscious biases. And we're making it legally required that professional bodies can't address any of those things. And what this really comes down to is a course that the Law Society mandated lawyers had to take on Indigenous history. And this came up at the press conference where the bill was announced.
It would look like the path course would be fine under this scheme. So just looking for a bit more of a follow-up there.
Yeah, I think you're asking me if the path course would have been would have gone forward with the RPNA in place. It's difficult for me to speculate on what might have happened, but my inkling is that it probably would not have been because of the nature of the course and the nature of whether or not it's relevant to the work that lawyers do necessarily. And so I would probably say to you that this is an assessment of a case-by-case basis, like every other type of interaction that a regulator has with their professionals. But to speculate on what may or may not be permitted under this act would be nearly impossible right now. We'll assess it as they come. They will arise certainly going forward. We were certain to see cases where a challenge is made, and then we'll assess it at that time. But it's difficult to speculate on something that hasn't happened yet.
So that's Mickey Amery, Justice Minister, Attorney General, very big boy, talking about how there's just so many areas of law that don't apply to Indigenous folks, to First Nations folks. I'd like a list, please. Can I get a list of those things? Because I feel like a lot of them do. I feel like most of them probably do. And I mean, I'm just going to turn the clock back to May 6, 2025, because there's some folks who are responding to Danielle Smith's initial changes to citizen-led referendum and the opening of the door to separatism, who had some thoughts about what sort of professions First Nations folks might have a particular interest in and the reasons why.
As far as the first question, how prepared are we? Many First Nations have been in litigation for many, 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 many years. Since the introduction of the white paper and the assimilation of First Nations across Canada, we've had our guard up. Prior to that, we know that the Indian agents and the government of Canada ruled us like a concentration camp. Our people were not allowed to leave the reserve without a permit. And the overseer, the Indian agent, he dictated who lived and died, who ate, who didn't eat. And that's what we lived under. And many people don't know that. And so for the last 50 years, we've been in defense of our rights, of our land, our jurisdiction, our identity. When you look back at the NRTA, when it was implemented in the 1930s, First Nations couldn't get a lawyer and couldn't get legal advice. Yet they made the decision on the resources of Alberta without our input. We had nothing to say. And for over 100 years, we got nothing out of those resources until those who were lucky to have it started to fight and started to challenge. And so how prepared are we? We're very prepared. Today, every one of the First Nations you see here, we've got doctors, we've got lawyers, we've got judges, we've got Crown prosecutors. We're ready. We're ready for a fight. We got resources that we can either share or utilize ourselves for any litigation moving forward and any challenges we're going to have. So we're ready. And so if it comes down to it, and how confident are we? Put yourself in the moccasins of a First Nations and look at the history that we've had to go through. And ask yourself, how confident would I be for a government that's going to recognize a First Nation and give them what's rightfully theirs when today we're dealing with this in 2025? How confident are we? I'll let you answer that. But we're ready. We're ready for the fight.
I'm not even going to try to add anything to that. We're just going to move right on to healthcare. Because we also have to talk about, as we chew away at the elephant tonight, we got to talk about Bill 11, because this makes some massive changes in regards to how healthcare is done in the province of Alberta. But before we get into it, I want to play a clip. And this is going to go back to April 11th, 2023, just before the election was called. It was called on May 1st, where Danielle Smith talked about the UCP's promises, their commitments, and listen very, very carefully to the words that she says.
Today, I'm pleased to announce the United Conservative Public Healthcare Guarantee. Under this public health care guarantee, the UCP is committed to all Albertans that under no circumstances will any Albertan ever have to pay out of pocket for access to their family doctor or to get the medical treatment that they need. And it means that a UCP government under my leadership will not delist any medical services or prescriptions now covered by Alberta Health Insurance. No exceptions. Now, many of you have seen that the Alberta NDP has been lying to Albertans about our government's position on public health care. That's because they know that the only way that they're going to win this election is if they can scare enough Albertans into thinking that the UCP is going to make them pay for health care or is going to steal their pensions or who knows what else. But Liberal, NDP, fear and smear politics don't work in Alberta. Albertans have always seen through these lies for what they are, and they will see through them again. So as we keep moving Alberta forward with our ambitious plan to improve healthcare outcomes, rest assured you will never use a credit card to pay for a public healthcare service. You will only ever need your Alberta healthcare card. Under a re-elected UCP government, your Alberta healthcare card will be your key and the only key to accessing world-class healthcare every Albertan deserves. We are making historic investments in healthcare, including and especially in primary care, because every Albertan deserves a family doctor. A UCP government will continue to ensure that Albertans have public access to a family doctor. That is our public healthcare guarantee. Doctors and clinics like the one you're at today, they're small business owners. But when you and I go for a checkup, you don't need to pull out a credit card, and you won't have to. With a UCP government, you will never have to. No Albertan will ever have to pay to see a family doctor out of pocket because a UCP government is committed to a publicly funded healthcare system. We have to correct the record. No one is ever going to pay out of pocket to see a doctor or receive medical services.
No one's ever going to pay out of pocket to see a doctor or receive medical services. If there's one line that you hold on to from that whole little thinger that she did there, hold on to that one for the next, 15, 20 minutes or whatever it is, because fast forward the clock a little bit to October of this year, and it was a very different speech.
That is why I am announcing today that the Government of Alberta is planning to introduce legislative reforms that will permit Albertans to privately purchase any private diagnostic screening and testing service that they wish. This includes MRIs, CT scans, full body scans, blood work, you name it. If there's a preventative test you wish to purchase, you will be entirely free to do so in Alberta. And that means that health professionals and medical organizations will be free to offer these services privately, and supplemental health benefit plans will be able to insure them. We want to see a flood of investment and health professionals into Alberta to strengthen our preventative health care system for Albertans right across the province, and this will help us to do it.
Now, to be clear, the UCP's public health guarantee remains in full force. And that means, first, when your family doctor asks you to get any kind of medical test, that test will continue to be covered by your Alberta healthcare insurance plan. Second, we will also ensure that these doctor-referred tests receive preferential treatment in all facilities, whether private or public, across the province. And we're taking it one step further. Third, if someone goes to a private clinic and purchases a preventative health test, and that test identifies a life-threatening condition that had not been previously known by that individual, the Government of Alberta will reimburse the cost of that private test to that individual.
And make no mistake, this reimbursement incentive makes perfect sense for taxpayers because it means the government will save massive amounts of tax dollars by catching an individual's health problem much earlier, long before it becomes so serious and acute that they need to be placed in a hospital or receive advanced cancer treatment, as an example. Taxpayers will also benefit as this allows the private sector to acquire and build billions of dollars worth of diagnostic equipment and infrastructure right here in Alberta for both public and private use, with no extra tax dollars being spent.
Oh, see how we moved the goalposts there? First, it was you'll never ever have to pay to see your family doctor to get any tests. Now it's, well, you can pay. You can pay. We're gonna make it so that you can pay. And there's a lot of problems with this this pitch. There's a tremendous appeal. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of people who are going to hear that and go, "Oh my goodness, if I can just go and get tested because I can afford it." So already right there we have some problems, because if you take a look at what demographics tend to suffer the most from the most debilitating conditions, it's not the wealthy ones. It's the people who wouldn't be able to afford any of this. So the preventative piece is only if you've got the means. If you have the means and the money, then you deserve to have preventative diagnostic tests, I guess. If you don't, well, it sucks to be you. We'll just have to work you through when we work you through. So there is an appeal that exists for people who might want to maybe, go, gosh, what if I have a thing? What if I need to know about the thing? There's problems here too. Anybody who works in medicine has probably heard the term incidentalomas. And what it basically means is there's all kinds of dumb stuff and weird things that happen in the human body. Most of them are boring, but they're not normal. And because they're not normal, they'll show up on tests. And if, oh my gosh, there's something different, I should get that looked at. I need more testing. And that requires more and more resources. And this is where the big problem comes into play, because let's say that you have 10 units of healthcare workers. You have 10 units of healthcare workers. This is a very small number for examples. And you want to get all of the people who need to be treated. And currently in the province of Alberta, you're falling behind. If you open up the doors for people to pay privately, you also open up the doors for some of those healthcare unit workers to go over and make more money over there. And so what you've done is you've depleted the workers in the public healthcare system, because now you've got 5 healthcare workers units who are hanging out in the private system where the hours are great, and they've got Nespresso machines. And the other 5 are now continuing to try to do the workload that existed for all of the people who couldn't pay to skip the line. That's a huge problem in and of itself. So we're depleting healthcare resources. We've got the incidentalomas, but we also have tests aren't safe. I mean, they're safe-ish. But the reason why doctors are the ones who prescribe, in effect, tests when you want a requisition for I would like to get a requisition for my knee that's been bugging me. I'd like to know what's going on with that knee, please. You talk to your doctor, and your doctor goes, yeah, that's reasonable. A couple of screens of x-ray. This is a tiny little bit of radiation. That's not going to cause too many problems. Won't be a big deal. That doctor is making a calculation as to, is this test worth it? Is this test relevant? Is a doctor going to recommend, if you've got a little bit of a crunchy knee, that you immediately get somebody going in there with a scope to look at it? No, because we can do the x-rays first. And there's a whole hierarchy of tests. You want to do the little ones, the least risky ones first, and work your way up. But there are very few medical interventions or medical tests that don't come with some risks. And we can use one of the things that Adriana LaGrange cited as an example there. You can get, CTs. You want a CT? You can get a CT. Here's the problem with that. CTs or CAT scans, they are computer-assisted x-rays, in effect. So instead of getting hit with one dose of x-ray to get that one little picture, you get hit with hundreds, if not thousands, of doses of x-rays, and it makes a very, very nice detailed picture, and you can look at different slices of all of the things. And it's absolutely critical and relevant in certain situations. But to say to somebody, hey, why don't you go high dose yourself with radiation just for your peace of mind, is not a great choice, because they actually go out of their way to limit radiation exposure because it causes cancer. That's an easy example, but there's lots of other examples. And if you just got Timmy with his credit card making the decisions over what tests that he wants to get because he's got anxiety and he doesn't talk to his doctor first, or he disagrees with his doctor, if you don't have somebody saying these tests could cumulatively cause harm, or there are risks involved with these specific tests, if you don't have somebody who knows the things making those decisions, you're 100% putting people at risk. So for a lot of different reasons, it's a terrible, terrible idea. But it's one they plowed ahead with because the UCP brought forward Bill 11. And this is where we need to take a quick beat, take a second to talk about Danielle Smith's vision of healthcare. Because on a recent podcast, she articulated it quite clearly.
When I came in, I thought, why is $40 billion of our budget in an Alberta Health Services agency we have no oversight over? And then when you look at schools, we have $10 billion of our budget that we've delegated authority to 61 school authorities that we have no oversight over. We have another huge chunk that we give to universities that we have no oversight over, and on and on and on it goes. So I think you need to have a conservative vision for what you're going to do with the government spending. And our conservative vision is very different than the progressive vision. Our conservative vision is to partner with private entities, whether in the private sector, whether in the nonprofit sector, or whether it's charities, to deliver on the services that people care about. When you think about historically, where did all of the supports for widows and orphans come from? Where did the supports for the vulnerable sector come from? It started with faith-based communities, and government said, wait a minute, we've got a patchwork here. Why don't we step in to help? But in doing so, they've often crowded out some of that incredibly important nonprofit work. And so we're restoring that. We're finding a way to create a structure in government where you do have competition and choice and funding following patients or students or clients so that you can create an internal market. So that's what I want to do, is I want to apply principles that I know work in the private sector to how we deliver government services. And we're making great strides in a lot of different areas. I think education is probably the greatest example in Alberta of how we do that. You have a choice of sending your kids to a public school or a Catholic school or a charter school or an independent school, or you can homeschool if you want. We have different funding models for each of those. But in Alberta, we have parents willing to pay a portion of their own money to homeschool their kids or send them to an independent school. And we celebrate that. We think that that's good because it's good for taxpayers, but it's also good for them. And it allows them to make sure that the values that they teach at home are replicated in the values in the classroom. And that to me is an example of the kind of conservative vision for how you deliver social programs. You're still supporting people with the dollars to defray the cost of it, but you give the choice so that the type of choice that they have for their kids makes sense for the family and for the student.
Now, there is a lot to unpack there. Whether we're talking about the whole idea of we should be having values in how people access healthcare when we're putting up more barriers to entry for healthcare, and you've just put forward legislation that said professionals shouldn't be educated on values. That's a fascinating choice. But again, there's so much in there that Danielle Smith said that's just demonstrably false. And a lot of this was debunked very, very well in a video that's making the rounds on social media, where they talk about the fact that, well, actually, it turns out government oversight does exist for AHS, and government oversight does exist for healthcare and for education, and all of the things that you said there's no government oversight for. You fired multiple boards. You were fired yourself from your first role as a school board trustee by the government. So yeah, that oversight very much does exist, and to try to portray it as not existing is disingenuous, if not straight up bullshit. But we got another contender for the Danielle Smith making things up category, because $40 billion. I came in, I found out $40 billion, so much money that people were putting towards this AHS. Nobody's monitoring it. Well, yes, they were monitoring it. And again, we can look very easily at the fact that the COVID restrictions were ruled illegal because Jason Kenney and the cabinet were interfering in the recommendations from the chief medical officer of health. So I guess there was an unhealthy amount of oversight that was at play here. We've certainly seen no shortage of examples recently, like I said, with the AHS boards being fired, with the AHS CEO being fired for investigating the whole corrupt care scandal thing. Anyways, let's look at the AHS budget. Because it turns out when you take a look at what the AHS budget was for 2021, 2022, the reality is the total expenses, 16 billion and relatively 15 billion, but they ran surpluses. They had the accumulated surpluses where they actually were able to sustain. And in one case, they made, it looks like, $400,000, or didn't spend $400,000, but we're nowhere near $40 billion a year. She's off by double, which is not a small amount. So if you're going to throw out numbers that are hyperbolic and designed to get people upset, you should at least say, hey, I'm making shit up now. But if you're going to try to speak with any kind of authority, it should be maybe with something that isn't quite so easily disproven. Because that's the AHS budget. We literally pulled it from the AHS website where they publicly disclosed their budgets up until 2023, 2024, when all of that government oversight interference caused a bunch of delays that the Auditor General just recently highlighted in a report where he raised concerns about how they weren't able to get their reports done because the government wasn't signing off on them. Yep, that works well. But there's another piece as well that we have to talk about in Dani's whole thing there, because she's very, very clear that what she wants to see happen is she wants to have private companies come in and deliver the services that historically government would deliver. So somewhere in Dani's mind, she's thinking, hey, you know what would work really well and will save us money? What if we introduced a layer of profit across the board, not just for healthcare, but let's do it for education. Let's do it for social services. Let's do it for the widows and the orphans, because Canada certainly doesn't have any sort of negative history with religious groups operating orphanages or schools for kids. Do we? There's no track record there. Again, this is where maybe some of that DEI education perhaps would have come in a little bit handy for Dani there. But the reality is, if you introduce profit as an additional layer, it's just going to end up costing more. And we don't have to look very far to find recent examples. We saw the Auditor General's report on Dynalife come out, and the spectacular amount of money that was wasted in an effort where private companies said, oh yeah, no, we can totally handle this, and then got involved. They were like, whoa, we can't handle this at all. And it ended up having catastrophic effects, not only to people's health, but it cost taxpayers a lot of money. And I could think of, I've heard tell that there were a couple of recent chartered surgical facility contracts that were canceled because there was some kind of problem with the pricing that was in effect, and how those contracts were negotiated. Anyways, the pricing was dictated by the Minister of Health at the time, Adriana Lagrange. So do with that what you will. But yeah, those contracts were canceled. It's, I don't know. But that was not all that she had to say on the healthcare file. Because if you remember a while back, Daniel Smith was talking about the importance of maybe if we could just get people health spending accounts, then we could expand option. We could expand choice. We could get more privatization in. And it looks a lot like a rose by any other name is still a rose.
Based on what I said about education, that's what we're looking at doing in healthcare as well. That we've got publicly run facilities, both public and Catholic, like the Covenant Health System is a Catholic system. We've got independent entities, so we've got our charter surgical centers, and now we're allowing for dual practice so that there's another opportunity for people to be able to, if they choose, pay out of pocket for elective surgeries. And so that's that, and we're moving towards activity-based funding. meaning funding follows the patient to the facility where they want to receive treatment. So we're taking the principles that we know work in free enterprise, principles that have been working quite well in education, and applying them to our other public services. And I think that that's a conservative vision for how to deliver on public services. At the same time, we're doing everything we can to create an environment where we can get more investment. New bitumen pipeline to Asia, the new data centers and power generation with natural gas, new markets for our products in Asia, new investment in agri-food processing, in film and television tax credits, and venture capital. If all of this can work together where we can continue to have a vibrant, free enterprise, robust environment where jobs are being created, then people can take care of themselves. But then you also have the revenues that you need to take care of those who need support and help.
I love the tone. I mean, we'll get into the activity-based funding in a sec, but I love the tone at the end of the clip there where she was like, yeah, we can have this amazing economy and people will have jobs and they'll be able to take care of themselves. And if there's a few people that we have to take care of as well, whatever, I guess we have to. It's perfect. But it's the activity-based funding piece that is interesting, because the idea is the money follows the patient, you see, so the patient can go and choose to do what they want, where they want, much like parents can choose to do with education. So it's basically the same thing, where we're going to have all of these different areas where people can choose where they want to take the taxpayers' money to. And if some of those places happen to include a profit margin, well, that's okay, I guess, because it's just taxpayers' money. Who cares? It is the health spending account scheme, spun up, given a different name, in order to accelerate and give access to more private healthcare. And when we take a look at what Bill 11 actually does, that's very, very clear, because it allows, the big changes are, it allows physicians to work in both the public and the private system. And if you remember what I said earlier about the healthcare units with the 5 and the 5, if you start to allow physicians to spend more of their time working in the lucrative private system where they can pick and choose and they can cherry pick and they don't have to deal with complex patients, they're going to spend more and more time there. And that robs the public healthcare system that's accessible to everybody, not just the people who have money. That robs them of that, and it normalizes that shift. It also allows employers to potentially offer private physician access as a benefit. You want to get a really good doc? Oh, come work for Bob's paper company, because we've got Timmy, and he has signed a contract where he exclusively during the day works for us, and for our employees here. It's the best thing ever. You should come work for us. And it, of course, changes healthcare cards to have the same driver's license, the photo ID requirements, which the Privacy Commissioner has already raised concerns about. So that gets us up to Bill 14. Another bite of the elephant, folks. And Bill 14 is one that has gotten the lion's share. See what I did there, eating the elephant with the lion? The lion's share of attention. And it is what is referred to as an omnibus bill. And what that means is it's a bill that doesn't just make one law or make changes to one law. It makes changes to a bunch. And in fact, when it was released, the fact sheet that the government had to release was 3 pages of very, 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 very small font, long, where they talked about all of the changes that were being made. And it really does make it quite clear that there's some big special interest pieces that are coming into play. We're going to take a quick look at some of those right now. So the first one I want to talk about is the changes to the Conflicts of Interest Act, because if we aren't starting off the whole thing with changes to how easy it is for friends and family to accept gifts from constituency associations, then what are we even doing with our time here? It is remarkable to me that a government that is still navigating its way, doing everything it can to pretend that the corrupt care scandal isn't a thing, to pretend that the Globe and Mail didn't just run a story where they had pictures of Danny in a skybox. that they would say, okay, well, yeah, there's all of this stuff going on, but what we really need to do is make it much easier for family, the spouse, the adult interdependent partner, or the minor child to receive gifts from the member's political party, constituency association, or prospective candidate association, or a charitable organization. Hey, are there any media organizations that operate as charities? I can't remember. It is remarkable that's where they would choose to swing. They also made changes to the Elections Act, making it more difficult for people to get nominated, or collect the signatures required to be nominated. The big amendment is they changed the number of signatures that you have to get in order to be a nominated candidate from 25 to 100, which is not a big deal. The big change, though, is no elector may sign more than one nomination paper in respect of the same election. No person may directly or indirectly or induce or attempt to induce an elector to sign more than one nomination paper in respect of the same election. Now, that might not sound like a big deal, but somebody's going to have to check all that and compare it against all the other names. And there's also an argument to be made as to how do you find out who your candidate of choice is going to be, if not for an election campaign? And I'll speak from personal experience here. When I made the foolhardy mistake of running in the 2019 provincial election and soundly getting thumped, there were a few folks who signed my papers who also signed other people's papers. And they did it not because I was being lazy or they were being lazy or somebody else was being lazy. They did it because they believed that an election campaign and seeing how that person performs in an election campaign is the best way to determine who is the best candidate for their area. They also did it because they believed anybody who wants to run for office should be given the opportunity to prove themselves in an election campaign. And forcing somebody to essentially pre-vote is a very bizarre choice for a government that is so committed to democracy and the democratic principles. It's not, and we'll talk about how it's not in the next section right here. Because for a government that is so committed to free speech, they legislated themselves out of a bit of a conundrum. Because there's been an ongoing conversation going on in the province of Alberta about what it means to be conservative. And there have been a lot of people asking the question, hey, does the UCP represent conservative values, traditional Alberta conservative values? And there's a lot of people who are saying no. I look at somebody like Marg, who started AB Resistance. She identifies as a lifelong Alberta conservative, and she says this is not a party that in any way represents the values that I have stood beside for the entirety of my time in Alberta. I look at somebody like Thomas Lukaszuk, who he was a deputy premier and a minister of more than a few portfolios. And he has openly come out and said, this UCP is not the progressive conservative. It has nothing of the progressive conservatives in it. It has only the worst parts of the Wild Rose in it. And so it's not unreasonable for Albertans to wonder, hey, is there maybe another conservative choice out there that maybe is available? And there's been some polling done that we've talked about on the show that's made it very, very clear. Oh, it turns out if there is another conservative option, the UCP are in a whole lot of trouble. So the party of democracy, accessibility, permissive, did what any reasonable, freedom-loving Democratic Party would do. They banned words. I mean, it's the party of book bans, so why not ban words? They added a section to the Elections Act saying that for the purposes of this section, any of these words, you are not allowed to use them in political parties ever again. You cannot use the word advantage. You cannot use the word communist. You cannot use the word conservative. You cannot use the word democratic. You cannot use the word green. You cannot use the word independence, liberal, pro-life, reform, Republican, solidarity, or wild rose. Anybody who's been paying attention to Alberta politics for a while now know that the Alberta Party actually was actively pursuing changing their name to Progressive Conservative. They wanted to take back the Progressive Conservative name. The UCP weren't using it. They had let it lapse in registration. Somebody had registered it with Elections Alberta and given it to the Alberta Party. All of the rules had been followed, but because freedom, I guess, the UCP said, you know what? We don't want to deal with the courts on this one. We're just going to make it illegal for anybody to use the word conservative in any other conservative party. There shall be only one flavor of conservatism in the province of Alberta, and you will like it, which does not say we're open to a plurality of ideas. It does not say we're open to, we're not worried about the competition. I said months ago, the best thing that the UCP could have done with that whole Alberta Party Progressive Conservative thing is say, have it. You go ahead. You go right ahead and you try to build your Progressive Conservative Party, because we are the United Conservative Party. We stand together as conservatives, and we're not afraid of you, Peter Guthrie. I'm not afraid of you, Scott Sinclair. That would have been the smartest thing they could have done. But clearly they are afraid. And their response to being afraid that they have failed the conservative brand in this province was not to course correct. It was not to turn down the crazy. It was to turn it up and legislate away the option of anybody else trying to bring any other kind of flavor of conservatism to the ballot box in the next provincial election. And they also, that's just like, it's, so Mickey Amery added a section as well, making himself immune from any proceedings of the Law Society, because that's what innocent people always do. They give themselves immunity. Attorney General of Alberta immunity. A person who is or has been the Attorney General of Alberta is not subject to any proceedings of the Society or to any sanction imposed under the Act for anything done by the person while exercising the powers and carrying out the duties of the functions of the Alberta Attorney General of Alberta. So that's super fun when you just say, hey, I can't be held responsible in any way for what I do. Anyways, Mickey Amery was asked about it.
The UCP likes to portray itself as the party of free speech. And then now today you're saying that you want to restrict which words can appear in the name of a political party. How do you explain and justify this restriction on free speech and freedom of association, which is protected by the Charter?
Well, certainly. The same way that we protect businesses who have names from others taking those names and using them, using their goodwill and their reputations. We do the same thing all the time. There is no difference between somebody registering a political name that is very similar to an existing and well-established political party as there would be for a restaurant that has been in operation for decades, having a competitor open next door with a very similar same name. There are rules about this all across our province and our country. This is not unusual.
Kind of a flawed analogy for a long list of reasons. What the UCP are doing is not protecting a brand. They're protecting a product. The metaphor should not be, well, if you opened a restaurant and somebody opened a restaurant right beside you and they had a similar name, it would be so unfair. People wouldn't know where to go for the food that they like. That's not the metaphor. The metaphor is we don't want anyone else selling apple juice. We don't want anyone else selling fettuccine. We don't want anyone else selling a cookie, a chocolate chip cookie. There can only be one brand of chocolate chip cookie from now on. It's going to be ours. You're going to love it. That's the metaphor here. Because if it is just the word, if the only value is the word, that is a sad self-indictment on the value that you're bringing to the word. There are there are lots of people who know that there are good fast food. Like, you can go to a fast food chain. Let's call it, I don't know. Let's call it Milk King. And there are some very good Milk Kings out there, and you go to those ones. But there are many people who know that there are Milk Kings that you can go, and they're not clean. They're not good. People do not go to those ones. So even within the brand, people have an awareness. And to suggest that Albertans wouldn't be able to know the difference between two different conservative parties is not only a gross misunderestimation of what Albertans are capable of, but it's also historically blind, because in 2019, the Freedom Conservative Party, that had freedom in it too. The Freedom Conservative Party ran in the election, and they gathered, apparently from the blind stupidity of Albertans not being able to tell the difference between the Freedom Conservative Party and the United Conservative Party, they gathered just slightly more than I think it was 0.5% of the vote. I guess Albertans do know the difference. So I guess that's not what the real fear is. But the question also came up in regards to the use of the litigation, the tendency to override the courts. You heard that question there. There's multiple instances now where the legislature has said, well, we have to do this thing because of the reasons that we're giving you. And then they did the thing. And then it turns out in some of those instances where the UCP used the nuclear option, they were not entirely forthcoming with what their reasons were. And we don't have to look any farther than the teacher's strike, because the UCP were very, very clear. Oh, the harm to the children. We had to wait 3 weeks because we wanted to make sure that we hit that mark of, like, where does the harm really start to get hit? And they had all of these numbers that they trotted out, and they said, hey, yeah, it's the harm to the kids. We're just so desperately worried about the kids, y'all. It's really, really scary. What we're thinking about with the kids. We gotta protect the kids. We can never have COVID happen again. We can never have children's education be crushed again. But then some little Calgary-based podcast got their little fingers on an email that said something different. And recently Nicolaides was asked about that.
There's a leaked email from Martin Long circulating online. And in it, he says, regarding the teachers' strike imposition of back-to-work legislation, in practice, an arbitrator would have likely sought a middle ground between the two proposals, leaving taxpayers on the hook for hundreds of millions, potentially billions in additional costs. And that's why they had to use the notwithstanding clause. So where is he getting this information from? Did you have some kind of analysis that going to arbitration was going to cause some huge spike in costs for education?
Well, I would encourage you to chat with him, of course, directly about his comments. I know that when we look at the notwithstanding clause and the rationale for implementing it, is quite simple, which I think Minister Long is getting at with respect to his comments there, which is that the elected leaders of this province and the Legislative Assembly need to be the ones to make the final decision, especially on something that can have significant policy and financial implications. Those final decisions should rest with elected officials and not unelected individuals like an arbitrator.
So it was about the money. It wasn't about kids. It was about the money. So the rationale for using the notwithstanding clause to take away tens of thousands of teachers' charter rights had nothing to do with, well, maybe a little bit to do with getting the kids back to school. But the reason that Martin Long articulated and their Demetrius Nicolaides articulated was because, well, an arbitrator might have looked at just how much we underfund education in the province of Alberta. Boy, that would have been expensive. And in case you think that was Nicolaides just tripping up on the first answer, he did give a second one.
When you're saying that, like, it's best if elected officials make decisions rather than arbitrators, does that not imply that there's some fairness consideration there? That, it wouldn't be fair to meet in the middle? Like, I'm kind of just hoping you can expand on your point there.
Sure. No, what I mean is that when we're looking at a circumstance that could impact government finances to the tunes of billions of dollars and influence and change government policy with respect to classroom management, those are complex considerations that can impact a variety of other areas of government policy and priority. And so those final decisions, I firmly believe, need to be in the hands of elected officials and not independent, unelected arbitrators.
So what do we have so far? We've got Nicolaides saying, oh, the elected officials, those are the ones who should have the power because they're elected. Damn the guardrails. We've got Mickey Amery saying, hey, I made this law, so you can just stop all of the court's proceedings on all of the things because I've made this law. And one of the things that he was trying to legislate on was a referendum question that was put forward by the Alberta Prosperity Project. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, Alberta Prosperity Project. They put forward a question that was kind of clumsy, and it was definitely anti-constitutional. And so the chief elections officer referred it to the courts and said, hey, can I get a ruling on this? Because I need an expert's opinion on whether or not this question is constitutional, because if it's constitutional, that's fine. But if it's not constitutional, then we have a problem. Mickey Amery came in and with this new set of legislation introduced and said, yeah, I expect the courts to shut down that whole thing now because we've made a new law that circumvents all of that because I'm the elected official and therefore I get to make all of the big boy decisions. And it turns out the court was not super happy about that because the judge in question, he issued a ruling before the law came into effect, before the law was passed. So when a law is introduced into the legislature, everybody goes like, oh, that's a terrible idea. But there's a period that exists between that bill being introduced and that bill receiving royal assent where it's just a very bad idea. It's not a very bad law. And in that period of this bill being a very bad idea, the judge decided to rule on the questions that were before the court and a little bit more. We're going to talk about the ruling first because the ruling is a pretty big deal. Not only does the ruling make it clear that the question put forward by the Alberta Prosperity Project would be violating the Constitution and the Charter, it also makes it very, very clear, and this is probably for me personally, this is the most important part of this conversation and this ruling. The epilogue's awesome, to be clear, but this is the most important part because this is the first that I'm aware of, and I'm no lawyer, that I've seen a judge come out and say these words that everybody has said. And I've said them many times on this show, but this is a court ruling that says it very clearly. Perhaps an independent Alberta would adopt a provision like the Constitution Act 1982, Section 35, and recognize and affirm treaty rights. But for the reasons explained above, Alberta cannot secede to the numbered treaties without the consent of First Nations. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what you call a ball game. Because that is a judge saying unequivocally that unless you get all of the treaties, all of the First Nations that are signatories to all of the treaties that cover every square inch of the province that's not national parks, unless you get them to agree to secession, you go nowhere. You get nowhere. And I remain firm in my conviction. And I say this is a middle-aged white guy. It would be insanity for any of the signatories of those treaties, given the way that this government has treated them over the last, certainly a couple of years, but we can go back much, much farther than that, to trust the white folks this time. It would be insanity of them to do that. But it's settled now. A judge has said Alberta can't leave without the consent of the First Nations that are signatories to those treaties. So you can have your little question. You can have your little referendum. It will be a giant waste of time and money and resources. It'll probably make a whole lot of people really, really angry on both sides, but you get nowhere without the consent of all of the treaty signatories. Best of luck. I love that part so much. But there's more because, as I said, there was an epilogue, and the judge made it very clear that he was very unimpressed with Amery's notion that the court proceedings should just be stopped. Late yesterday afternoon, Alberta wrote to the court to advise that Bill 14, Justice Statute Amendments Act, had been tabled in the Legislative Assembly. Alberta's letter explained that once this legislation takes legal effect, this action will be discontinued. The legal consequence of discontinuing this proceeding prior to a decision would be to silence the court. Legislating an end to litigation is extraordinary. Even the referendum proponent who stands to benefit from Alberta's actions wrote to the court last night expressing concern that the legislature is interfering in a duly convened judicial process. The proceeding continues today because JSA 2025 has not been passed by the Legislative Assembly and proclaimed into law. The case remains a live controversy until JSA 2025 is law. Further, there was no efficiency to be gained in declining to hear Blackfoot First Nations interveners who were ready to make their submissions. To refuse to hear the Blackfoot First Nations interveners who had worked under significant time pressure and incurred considerable expense to deliver evidence and written argument to the court would bring the administration of justice into disrepute. They asked for and were granted their day in court before Alberta decided to change the law, and it was only fair they have it regardless of the pending legislation. Contrary, moving forward, up to the paragraph 253. Legislating to preemptively end this court proceeding disrespects the administration of justice. We are in an age of scarce government resources that is as evident in the court system as it is anywhere. Alberta set up a process pursuant to CIA AS Section 2.1 that conscripted the court to determine a question of public importance, and in this case was given priority over the needs of other justice system participants. Only the parties, interveners, and the court invested many days inside and outside of the courtroom to bring this case to an expeditious conclusion. Did Alberta decide to change the law? Alberta's cavalier disregard for court resources and lack of consideration for the parties and First Nations interveners who participated in this proceeding in good faith is disappointing to say the least. Contrary to the pending JSA 2025, this case cannot be discontinued and the court cannot be silenced because the case has been decided. These reasons are delivered despite the anticipated change to the law because reason giving is democratic. This case concerned a matter of importance to the public, and these reasons are the product of significant investment from a diverse group of stakeholders who participated in the proceeding. The public is entitled to the fruits of this process that have been conducted largely at their expense. So if they are asked to vote on Alberta independence, they have a tool that may help them make sense of the legal dimensions of the secession of Alberta from Canada. And that is about as close as I've ever seen to a judicial mic drop. Makes it very, very clear. Alberta, government of Alberta, Mickey Amery, with his little law, disrespected the courts. They disrespected the people of Alberta. They disrespected the process because they think that because they were elected, just like Danny says, because leadership does come from the top, they can do whatever they want, whenever they want, and they don't have to worry about it until the next election. And if the last election was any indication with Danielle Smith's healthcare guarantee that she quickly turned heel on, they're more than happy to lie about it then too, presumably. There's some impacts from the passing of Bill 14. There's a lot of impacts from the passing of Bill 14, but one of the quickest and the ones that have gotten the most attention has to do with the referendum questions. Because as the release from the province came out and acknowledged, there are two referendums that got in under the wire. One of them has to do with the funding. Public money is only going to public schools. The other one has to do with the Forever Alberta campaign. The two other ones that were pending, Corblund's petition to ban coal mining in the Eastern Slopes, as well as the Alberta Prosperity Project's separatism question, those have to be reapplied. And this is where we got to take a look at how Danny chose to talk about Bill 14.
Court of King's Bench judge has called your government's new referendum bill undemocratic, extraordinary, and the antithesis of the stable, predictable, and ordered society that the rule of law contemplates. Justice Colin Feasby says the bill effectively shuts down his ongoing review of the Alberta independence referendum question after months of work by the court, First Nations interveners, and Elections Alberta, and that changing the law midstream undermines the administration of justice. That's a mouthful. Premier, why was it necessary for your government to intervene before the legal process finished?
You know, citizen-initiated referendum is supposed to be permissive. It's not supposed to have a whole pile of gatekeepers standing in the way of questions that the public want to ask in good faith. And what we've been observing is that whether it's the chief electoral officer or the court, they seem to want to approve the ones they like and hold up the ones they don't like. And that's not democracy. What democracy is allowing for reasonable people to get together, put ideas to the citizenry, and then it's up to us as government to implement what they say in a constitutional way. It's not up to the chief electoral officer or the court to block a citizen-initiated referendum. And so what we were observing is it's on a couple of different issues. This isn't the only one. A couple of different issues that was happening. And so we're going to put that power in the hands of the justice minister. And his view is that it's going to be permissive. So I think that actually upholds democracy. I think it's the very opposite of what the judges said.
So, couple of things to highlight in that clip right there. First of all, Danny says, the judge is wrong. I used to be a talk show host. I know the law. She also went after the objectivity of the chief elections officer and judges by saying the ones they like, they let through, and they're holding up the ones they don't like. As if the judge and as if the chief elections officer wasn't following the laws that, by the way, Danny and co. recently amended. They're the ones who changed the laws and have now changed them again because they can't get it right the first time because they want to do it their way and their way only without any consultation, apparently, the first time, or at least not consultation that challenges the quality of the work that they've done. So the response there is not to say, hey, you know what? Yeah, that legislation, the first time that we put it forward, there were some kinks. And those kinks caused some problems. And we wanted to make sure that those problems got fixed before they caused any further problems. And that's why we've made the provision to allow for the two petitions that are going to have to restart to refile again without any additional cost. We're gonna waive the fee for those two ones because it was our mistake. We did not knock it out of the park on the first draft of that law in the way that we thought we did. Sorry about that. That's why we have to do this so quickly, because we don't want anyone else to have to redo their homework. That would have been the easy way to do it. But that's not what Danny did. That's not what any of the UCP ministers and caucus who have spoken to this issue have done. What they have done is they have said, oh, it's the gatekeepers. Oh, it's those pesky judges with their pesky interpretationing of the law in the ways that they like. They are undermining not just the chief elections officer. They're undermining the courts.
I'm going to try to boil it down to the significant question, and it does relate to the repeated use of what he says, the Constitution's nuclear option to circumvent the courts and override the will of Albertans without legislative debate. He is talking about, of course, the charter challenge.
Well, those are two different things. The will of Albertans is not expressed by a single judge appointed by Justin Trudeau and never faces any kind of recall campaign, never faces any kind of election. That's what we're talking about, is that in a lot of these cases, the people have told us through our consultation, through our elections, the kind of things they want us to do. And then we go and do them. and then the court can override it. And the court, again, most of the judges are appointed by Ottawa, not by us. And why should? I mean, I think it is not synonymous to have an unelected judge. An unelected judge is not synonymous with democracy. Democracy is when elected individuals who have to face the electorate every 4 years make decisions. That's what democracy is. So I think that things are getting a little bit muddled. They're getting. We believe that in the actions that we have taken, particularly when it comes to protecting kids' right to be able to have kids of their own one day, so that they do not make premature decisions to affect their fertility. We believe that girls and women have a right to participate in sport without having to compete against born male athletes. And we believe that parents should have a right to know what's going on with their kids at school. Those are very strongly supported policies, well above 70% of Albertans. So we believe we're the ones being democratic. The court stepped in and wanted to put an injunction on one of those bills. We suspected the other two were coming. And that's part of the reason we use the notwithstanding clause there, is to protect the democratic will of the people.
You see, it's the politicians who get elected. Those are the ones who are representing the will of the people. You can tell by the policies that they implement, that they campaigned on, like an Alberta pension plan, or an Alberta provincial police force, or private for-profit healthcare, or a lack of a public inquiry on the corrupt care scandal, or inserting themselves into the doctors' offices of competent physicians who are trying to provide care for their patients. Those are all things that if the government believed in, they would absolutely campaigned on, because otherwise they're only getting all of their feedback from focus groups that they control the entrance of and polls that they control the questions for, which is not democracy by any stretch of the imagination. And one of the fundamental principles of any healthy democracy is having checks and balances on the power structures that exist. And as I started off this show by saying, the judiciary is absolutely one of them. And the way that Danielle Smith talked about the judiciary in that clip should be stomach churning for any Albertan who heard it. Because she immediately went on the attack. Oh, these unelected judges appointed by Justin Trudeau, because any judge who was appointed by Justin Trudeau obviously must be biased as the subtext. Judges don't have press secretaries, and judges don't get the luxury of debating their decisions after their decisions are done. Judges don't do PR. They issue their rulings based on the law and the information that's before them. And I am not, as I said in the previous episode, saying that the court system in Alberta and Canada is flawless and there's no room for improvement and judges never make bad decisions, because all of those things, absolutely. Judges do make bad decisions. Court system is flawed, but it's the best system that we have right now. And to say, you know what? I'm going to disassemble all of the guardrails that exist because I want all of that power to myself. I don't think I should be questioned by anyone except for the electorate every 4 years. Is a chilling prospect, especially for a government that's trying to be so permissive about the referendums.
I'm a born and raised Calgarian. I've never seen anything like this in Alberta politics in my lifetime, and I've got a few decades on you. By the way, when I Googled Alberta recall petition, the first result was a website called change.org with its banner ad proclaiming the largest petition website, create a petition online today. So it seems like anybody with $500 and an axe to grind for whatever reason is launching a petition. And most have cited the use of the notwithstanding clause, sending teachers back to work, as a key reason. But it was the opposite for the petition against Calgary NDP MLA Amanda Chapman. So has this gone too far? People are abusing the legislation because the vote just didn't go their way in the general election?
I think there's no doubt that it's an abusive process. When the recall legislation came in under my predecessor, they looked at what was happening in British Columbia. That's the only other province that has recall petitions. And they have had it for 30 years. And there's been 30 petition campaigns. And so that would be kind of a reasonable amount that you would expect to see. So I think what you're seeing is that Public Interest Alberta and their union backers are using this as a way of trying to overthrow or override the last election results. When you want to have a broad-based election, you wait for a general election. The recall petition is meant to address issues of malfeasance, poor behavior. If you've got someone who has done something egregious, I think that's the intention that it was brought in with, and that's clearly not what they're doing here. So, I'm watching and seeing. I hope that they follow the rules, because the rules are not meant to allow for big union-backed campaigns against individual MLAs. They're supposed to be locally generated campaigns that are funded and supported by the people in the riding. So we're watching it. I hope everybody follows the rules, but they're at the moment we're just monitoring to see how they're going to end up. But I think most people feel as you do. It's a bit of an abusive process, and people see that.
When we last talked, you had contemplated maybe modifying the rules. That would be kind of like closing the barn door after the horse got out. So has your position changed?
Well, we did have a conversation with it at caucus, and we're going to watch and see. I mean, the rules should be followed, first of all, and there's lots of evidence that they're not, and we're keeping track of that also. But it is a bit unusual in that you can't even stand for a candidate unless you get a number of signatures and a deposit. This one, as you described, all it does is allow for anyone to put down $500 and launch the process. So I think maybe there were a few missing steps when the legislation was first put in place, and we'll have a further conversation as we see some of the violations or problems that we're seeing with this act and how it's being implemented. We'll see if there's any changes that are needed.
The revisionist history. Before we get into all of the different things that I want to take apart there, I feel like I would be remiss if not highlighting that the start of that clip was a very, very important example on why it is that people need to be responsible with how they use the internet. Because we had the show host there say, I Googled Alberta petition and stumbled across the change.org website. He did, and then made the connection in his head. That must be about the Alberta recalls. Change.org has been around for a very, very long time, and it has absolutely nothing to do with the petitions for recalls or referendum in the province of Alberta, because those are all internet-based petitions, and you have to have physical signatures. And teach your friends how to use the internet is all I'm saying. But there's some other things that are important to highlight there, because Danny's all like, oh, well, when the bill was, when the rules for recall were put into place, we never could have seen any of this stuff coming. It was not the original intent. It's not as if she just recently changed the rules around recall. Wait, that's exactly what she did. So if anybody has changed the rules around recall, it's the person who last changed the rules around recall, and that would be Danny. It's also worth highlighting again, just for the fact-checking purposes, that the Gil McGowan and the AFL have been very clear that they are not supporting these recalls. That's not what they're doing. They're not organizing. They support the idea of the recalls, but they're not putting any union resources behind the recalls. So that's not what's happening either. Gil McGowan put out a statement very clearly saying that, hey, this is all grassroots. We're not organizing these things. So again, we're denigrating the process when we don't like how it goes. But there's another piece that's really important to highlight here. Danny talks about, well, nobody's ever tried to do the recalls. And that's not entirely true. Former Calgary Mayor Jody Gondek, somebody did try to do a recall on her. Were profoundly unsuccessful. But that's the only other time. And so if you're going to look at, hey, why are all of these people so angry at me? Could it maybe be because you've done something to make all of those people very angry at you? And it's going to be fascinating to see how many signatures actually come out of this process. That's going to be very, very insightful, I think. We'll wait and see on that. But there's some other interesting little tidbits on the recall piece that I just want to touch on before I go to the last last thing. And that's this, because this is an email that we received. And this email talks about the recall in Lethbridge East for Nathan Udorf. And there's an amazing reporter down in Lethbridge who's been covering this story as well. She's really picked up the ball and run with it. And I would strongly encourage you to hop on our Twitter feed and find her and make sure that you keep up on what she's doing, because she's chasing this down really quite well. But this is an email that details concerns that allegedly the Lethbridge East recall is being organized out of Nathan Udorf's office. And this was a concern that was raised, is that if I was an MLA and I wanted to make sure that I protected myself from recall, because you can only have one recall per session, it's one of the safeties they put in there. I could just institute my own recall and nobody would show up to the party because I'm the organizer, or I could have a good friend do it or something like that. I don't know. And that would block all recall efforts against me. So I guess that would be one way to make sure that I didn't actually get recalled. That would be a strategy that I could do. And that's apparently the strategy that's being implied, if not alleged, to be happening in Lethbridge East. We will be following that with great interest. I want to go back to the broader theme, though. And the broader theme has been that we've seen over the last year with the UCP government. This is something that many political scientists have articulated, the consolidation of power by the UCP and the denigration of the institutions that are supposed to keep politicians in check, because politicians should not have absolute power. At the very, very least, the courts should be in a position where they can say these politicians are breaking the law. And if they're breaking the law in such a way that the politicians are able to use the notwithstanding clause, which we've seen happen in this province, then okay, that's what happens. But people should at least know when the politicians are breaking the law. Danielle Smith went after many people who are supposed to be part of the guardrails. She went after the chief elections officer, saying that he's letting through the petitions he likes and holding up the ones that he doesn't. She went after judges, saying unelected judges appointed by Justin Trudeau, throwing out heavy words that carry all kinds of bias and emotional weight that are designed to make people cautious, to make people concerned, to make people skeptical. She talked about how the media, the media, she loves to talk about the media, but she's not the only one. Again, the clips that we got from that right-wing podcaster from Vancouver, she gets comfortable and she uses words, but she's not the only one. And there is an active denigration of the safeguards that's happening in this province. And you don't have to look at just Danny. You can look at her right hand. This is Rob Anderson. He put up two quotes. These two tweets are literally just from the last week. The first one has to do with the BC court, which has, I don't know why Rob's weighing in on this, because it has to do with unceded territories and treaty land that's not signed. Rana. Oh, look, the source is from Juno News. Maybe that's why Rob's signal boosting them. I don't know. It's not like that used to be True North and one of those charitable media organizations. Oh, I'm probably just going down a rabbit hole. But of the BC court affirming UNDRIP, lefty activist judges having a banner week attacking private property rights and direct democracy, super duper helpful to maintaining public confidence in the judicial system, sigh. As if it's the judge's decisions that are eroding people's public confidence in the judicial system, and not the executive director for the premier's office saying lefty activist judges. But that's not all Rob had to say this week. Courtney Theriault, who's a news personality, journalist out of Edmonton, shared a global news story. Global news. shared the Global News story. Alberta's Smith says courts should not be gatekeepers on constitutional questions, giving Justice Minister Mickey Amery the power over referendum questions upholds democracy. We played those clips for you tonight. Rob Anderson comes in hot. Fake headline from the usual NDP bootlicker, air quotes, journalists. She said neither the CEO nor the court should play gatekeeper to regular Albertans being able to take out a citizen-initiated referendum petition. Damn right. Now, I'm not sure in this equation whom Rob was referring to as the NDP bootlicker, whether it was Global News or Courtney Theriault. I'm not sure who Rob was referring to. I don't think either of them are NDP bootlickers. That's just me, though. And I certainly don't think that it's appropriate for the executive director of the Premier's office to be casting aspersions at either Courtney Theriault or Global News and undermining people's confidence. If there's a factual error, fine. But if it's not a factual error, what are we doing here? Other than deliberately undermining the institutions that are supposed to keep politicians in check. Now, I know we're coming up to Lord of the Rings time again. This is what I get for not doing a show for a couple of weeks. Couple things that I want to throw out into the ether for those of you that have made it this far. It has been a brutal legislative session. We have seen government overreach with the use of the notwithstanding clause in multiple cases, punching down on people. We have seen this UCP government taking money directly out of the hands of disabled Albertans. We have seen the Premier, her staff denigrating judges, denigrating impartial public servants. We have seen all of this happening at the same time as they're all crying, freedom of speech. Everybody should be able to say what they want to say. And again, I can't imagine what it's like to have, I don't know, the highest authority in the land decide that they want to target you for things that you've said that were not false, but were critical. I can't imagine what I don't have to imagine. Because again, allegedly the Premier tried to have me fired twice. That's the hypocrisy, because it's not about any of those things. Those are the values that they love to dress themselves up in so they can further their consolidation of power. And people need to start calling it out for what it is. And this is where I'm going to direct all of you to check out the good doctor, Jared Wesley's Substack. I was hoping we could get him on the show before the end of the year, but he's a very, very busy man. He just recently wrote a Substack detailing 10 things that you can do, 10 real, tangible things that you can do in your day-to-day to push back against what is an increasingly authoritarian government. That's not me saying that. That's Dr. Dwayne Brad saying that at our live show in Calgary. I asked him the point back question. Is the Alberta government becoming more authoritarian? He laughed and said yes without missing a beat. He's not the only political scientist or expert that is raising the concerns about the fact that the UCP is dismantling the guardrails that are supposed to protect our democracy from flawed politicians by flawed politicians who are disassembling those guardrails in order to consolidate power amongst themselves while giving themselves immunity for their life after politics. This is not hyperbole. This is a statement of fact. It's really easy to get despondent. It's really easy to get frustrated because there's so much, and we're maybe halfway through the event, coming up to the 2.5 hour mark here. We will do the rest of the event in another episode, rest assured. But it's easy to get to get despondent and feel like there's nothing to do. Dr. Wesley gives a bunch of different things that you can do. I'm hoping that we're going to be able to get him on the show in the new year where he can talk about those things, because Lord knows these problems are not going to be going away. And that's about the course for tonight's elephant meal. couple things that I do really quickly want to talk about because I'm super excited for them. And in order to properly plug those things, I need to properly plug a couple of other things. So if you value the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set your own monthly commitment thinger, and that's wonderful. It helps us continue to be able to produce the show, do the FOIPs. We also have our Substack that's up and running. That's why we've taken a little bit of a break from the shows for the last 2 weeks, because not only do we have a Substack that we wanted to do about the whole Bill 14 debacle, but we are continuing to plug away at our series on the coal mines, and those Substacks are eventually going to turn into an episode. But we did a whole Substack on the history of coal mining in Alberta. Definitely worth checking that out. So there's the plugs for the Patreon and the Substack there. If you're not into the monthly support, or you don't want to Patreon for whatever reason, you can always also send e-transfers to info@thebreakdownab.ca. That's cool and fun also, I'm told. 2.5 hours is a long time to do a show. The other things that I want to talk about real quick, the other plugs that I want to make real quick. We do still have our merch store up and running. And I'm not gonna lie, I have the hoodie. And we have the hoodies, the shirts, all of the things. You can visit www.thebreakdownabmerch.ca to get your hands on all of that good stuff. Next weekend, got another live show we're going to be doing on the Sunday. The Saturday, reminder for our Patreon supporters, we're going to have our little special Christmas party in which we will be making a special little announcement about a poll that we threw up in our Discord for our Patreon supporters. And you don't want to miss that. So if you're a Patreon supporter, make sure you hop onto the Patreon page. All the details will be posted there on Saturday, and we're going to hang out for an hour and just hang out, ask us anything. It's just gonna be a nice little evening, and then Sunday will be another live show where we continue to gnaw away at this elephant that is Alberta politics. And before I wrap it up for realsies, there's one more clip I gotta play.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I will never, ever, 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 ever get tired of that second nod. I don't know why, but I never will. And the rest of you have to sit through it with me. Thank you to everybody who has made it this far. If you're watching on the YouTubes, subscribe, the bell thing, send it to your friends. Comments apparently help the algorithm, I'm told. I'm very bad at the business end of this thing. If you're listening to the audio version, leave a little rating and a little review. That would be lovely. Thank you all so much. It has been wonderful to be able to do another live show. I'm looking back to getting into the swing of things and trying to find a balance between this and the Substacks. But thank you all so much for tuning in. Thank you to especially everybody who's been active in the chat tonight. As I wait for this to download, it's my favorite thing to do to read them and catch up on all of them. So thank you all there so much. Go to Dr. Wesley's Substack, give it a read, pick a couple of things to do. It's basically the same stuff. Talk to people. All of these crazy people doing these crazy things, they talk to everybody, and we got to start talking to people. So please, as we head into the silly season, don't be afraid to ruin all of the major holidays by being like, hey, so I'm pissed off at, there's lots to choose from. And see if you can't get some folks engaged, because we have to. It's the only thing that's going to work. So in the meantime and between time, take care of each other. And as always, keep the conversation going.